Hi, Rob here, and welcome to Workshop 4D. This is an important physiology workshop where we're going to be going through some of the differences in the different body systems as exercise intensity increases. We're going to look at what happens to our heart and lungs as exercise intensity demands go up, the differences between trained and untrained athletes, and also some of the long-term adaptations. What's really important to remember throughout this workshop is the concept of efficiency. So as the human body becomes more efficient, we end up doing more with less, and that's actually a good thing. Okay, as you become fitter, essentially it takes you less energy, there's less of a cost in your body to do a specific type of work. So let's keep that concept in mind. The first one we're talking about is how oxygen requirements, circulatory and ventilation responses change as exercise intensity increases. So let's look at oxygen requirements. So as exercise intensity goes up, there's obviously an increased demand of oxygen from working muscles. Now think about, let's use a cyclist as an example. As they're working hard climbing a hill, there's obviously a large oxygen demand from some of the big muscles in their body, like their quads and their glutes and their hamstrings. So because there's less oxygen available in those muscles and there's more oxygen available in the bloodstream, we're going to start giving some of the oxygen from the bloodstream to those working muscles. Now, how do we get an increased amount of oxygen requirements? All of our ventilation measures go up. So things like the amount of air that we breathe in, how fast we breathe in, and how fast and how much air we blow out. All those measures are going to go up as exercise intensity increases. The next one is circulation. So we're looking at the blood circulation. What happens as exercise intensity increases? The first thing is obviously going to be an increase in blood flow. So we're going to need more blood because blood is what carries oxygen, which is an energy, to our working muscles. How do we get an increase in blood flow? Well, obviously our heart is going to have to pump harder. So therefore we're looking at an increase in heart rate to match those increased circulation demands. Another important response is that we increase the capillarization of our working muscles. Essentially, we're building more blood vessels within those working muscles, which means it's easier for us to get the blood flow and oxygen delivery in there. Our blood pressure is going to go up. We're going to increase the force and the rate in which blood is pumped through our body, so that raises our blood pressure. We're going to increase the oxygen carrying capacity of our red blood cells. So the red blood cells is what carries oxygen. As we train them over time, we're going to be able to carry more oxygen throughout the body. And then the last one is the waste products. After we use oxygen as a fuel, we give off carbon dioxide. So we increase the body's ability to get rid of that and shuttle that back out of our bloodstream. The next one we're looking at is ventilation responses. So think about breathing. When exercise intensity increases, due to that increased oxygen demand, our breathing rates are going to go up. So our ventilation rate is the amount of times we breathe per minute. That's going to go up. Average at rest is about 12 to 15 breaths per minute. You might find that might go up to 20, 25, 30 plus breaths per minute. The next one is an increased tidal volume. So that's the amount of air that's breathed in with each breath. So not only are we going to be breathing in faster, we're going to be breathing in more air with every breath. An increase also is going to be in the activity of our intercostal and diaphragmatic muscles. They're basically the muscles that help us breathe. So because we need to breathe in more air, we need to expand our rib cage. So the muscles in between our rib cage are intercostal muscles, and the diaphragm, which actually moves downward, that helps us to take those big deep breaths, which increase our tidal volume. And the last one, we're looking at the increase in expelling of our waste byproducts. So not only are we breathing in harder to get the oxygen in, we're breathing out harder in order to get rid of that carbon dioxide. So the reason why this is so important to know as a trainer is to understand that training these aerobic energy systems by doing cardiovascular exercise is so important in improving the efficiency of your body. We can spend all the time that we want in the gym training our muscles and lifting weights and whatnot, but if we don't build an aerobic cardiovascular base, if we don't build our body's ability to breathe better, if we don't build our body's ability to shuttle blood throughout our system, then we're not going to be as efficient with all the other exercise that we do both in and out of the gym. Topic 2, we're going to cover how these respiratory breathing volumes differ between trained and untrained athletes. So let's have a look. The first one is tidal volume. Remembering that the tidal volume is the amount of air inhaled that we breathe in during normal inhalation and exhalation. Now, in a normal person, this is about half a litre, 500 to 600 millilitres. So when you're sitting there breathing normally, you're breathing in about half a litre of air with every breath. During activity, this tidal volume can actually increase by about 2. So it doubles to about 1 litre or 1,000 millilitres. So we're getting twice the amount of air we breathe in with each breath. Not only is that happening, but we're breathing more frequently, so our breathing rate is going up. Vital capacity is the next one, and this talks about the greatest volume of air that can be expelled or breathed out after taking a full breath. Now, why is this important? The maximal amount of air we can breathe in is great for getting oxygen to our muscles, but the maximum amount of air that we breathe out helps to get rid of the carbon dioxide. If you have a low vital capacity, which means you're having a hard time breathing in fully and breathing out fully, this is a really good indicator of lung diseases. And as a trainer, it's also a good one to look at with clients that have asthma, because if a client has asthma, you might find that their vital capacity, their ability to breathe in fully and breathe out fully, is going to be a little bit less. Trained athletes have a much higher vital capacity. That means they can just move more air each breath. They can breathe in deeper and they can breathe out harder. The third one is the residual volume. So this is the amount of air that's left over in the lungs after you breathe out. So if you think about breathing all the way out, what's left over is called the residual volume. Now, we need a small amount of air left over in our lungs because this actually prevents our lungs from collapsing. If we had no air left in our lungs would just collapse on themselves and be a lot harder for you to breathe back in again. In a normal person, this is about a litre that's left over in your lungs, and there's no real difference between trained and untrained athletes. Trained athletes have a slightly lower residual volume, maybe means they can access a bit more air in their lungs, but for the most part it's about the same. Understanding residual volumes and tidal capacities and functional capacities and all this sort of stuff, the reason why this is so important is because when you're prescribing cardiovascular exercise, you can start to monitor your clients for signs and symptoms. If you find that your clients aren't really getting in full amounts of air, you may be looking at a client that might have asthma, or even just some issues with knowing how to breathe. Breathing is actually a skill. Throughout dedicated aerobic training, working at high intensities and high heart rates, you're going to improve the body's ability to get these big breaths of air in and out and improve your lung function. So some tips for athletes or for the sporting population for understanding some of this stuff and how you can use it in your own training is to understand the concept that working really hard at high intensities is a great way to build your lung capacity. So we can use things like respiratory trainers, we can use things like restricted air devices. You might have seen those masks that some people wear when they train. Also training at altitude or things like that. All these different types of training modalities are going to help you improve your lung capacity. Working hard, high intensities, breathing hard and heavy, working really hard on improving the vital capacity means the body will be more efficient in terms of your lungs. For topic 3, we're now going to look at 3 different types of training: cardiovascular training, strength training, and flexibility training, and having a look at some of the short-term and long-term adaptations of each of these. So short-term are some of the effects that you might see within the session itself, and long-term is some of the long-term improvements. Again, let's think about efficiency again. So the human body gets better at doing things over a long term if we train it over and over again. Let's look at the first one, the cardiovascular system, so your heart and lungs. So the short-term responses, so we're going out for a hard run, working hard on a rower or a bike or something like that. Heart rate's going to go up, ventilation rate, breathing rate's going to go up, blood pressure's going to go up, an increase in blood flow to your working muscles, oxygen by the red blood cells, oxygen into the muscles, and an increase in what's called your parasympathetic nervous system response. This is essentially what we call your fight and flight response. So training is a stressor, and what it does, it fires up your nervous system. That's a good thing. That's what we want when we're training and we're working hard. We want our nervous system fired up. So the role of adrenaline comes into play here, and exercise actually gives you a jolt of adrenaline, which helps to raise all these other measures. What happens when we train the cardiovascular system over time? Think about elite athletes, runners, football players, people that are at high levels of fitness. We're going to see some long-term adaptations, and the body's going to become more efficient. So the first one is a decrease in resting heart rate. So we're going to find, because the heart's more efficient at pumping blood around the body, it doesn't need to pump as often. So a normal resting heart rate for an untrained person might be 70 beats per minute, but in a trained athlete it might be 40, 45 or 50 beats per minute. So again, we're doing the same amount of work with the body, but with a lot less cost. The next one is our resting blood pressure is going to go down. Really important one to hammer home with your clients, that throughout cardiovascular training, if you've got a client that has higher blood pressure, we're going to bring that blood pressure down over time at rest. That's a great sign. That's what we want. The next one is decrease in ventilation rates during equivalent exercise. So we all understand this. The first time we go for a run in 6 months, we're huffed and puffed, we're out of breath. We thought that was a lot more difficult than what it should be. And then over a couple of weeks of training, that same run, that same 5-kilometer run is now a lot easier. We're breathing a lot more evenly, we're breathing a lot more comfortably, we're breathing less often. So again, we're looking at efficiency. So that's a long-term adaptation. Increased capillarization of muscle cells. Our muscles are building more blood vessels. What does that mean? We're getting more blood flow, more oxygen into our muscles. That's great, that's what we want. And then the last one is an increased rate of return to baseline. We call this homeostasis. A great measure of your fitness is your body's ability to recover. So throughout long-term adaptations to training, we find we can recover faster. Why is that important? It means we can train again harder. It also means our body's becoming more efficient. It means we can push ourselves harder within those exercise sessions. So it's really important to understand that some of these long-term adaptations are from consistent training, and the training the cardiovascular system is very important for overall health as well. Some great tips for athletes for cardiovascular training is to use intervals. So I like to use intervals with almost all my clients depending on their health status, but training at areas where the heart rate is getting really high, around the 80 to 90, 95% of your heart rate maximum. Not only is that going to improve your fitness a lot faster than doing long, slow, steady pace stuff, but it's also going to improve your body's ability to recover. And we talked about a great measure of fitness is your body's ability to recover. So working really hard for 40 to 45 seconds, taking short rest periods of say 15 to 20 seconds, and repeating that over and over again is really important. So using intervals for short durations. And the other thing is also in the off season is building an aerobic base. Not a lot of athletes do enough of this, and that's actually training some longer, slower distance stuff. Even if it's long walks or slow jogs, long sessions on bikes, it's really important to do that just to build a base of aerobic fitness, and that's great for your overall health as well. The next one is resistance training or strength training. So some of the short-term adaptations within your individual gym session going into lift weights is you might get an immediate uptake of energy to the body. So the ATP, which we'll talk about in a later workshop, is the energy currency. Your body's going to be uptaking that energy and using it in the cells. We're going to be breaking down our muscle fibers, and this is specific to what type of training you're doing, how much load, how much volume, but we're essentially going to be breaking down those muscle fibers within that session. That's a great sign because we regrow those muscles bigger, stronger, and faster in the long term. The next one is we're increasing our neuromuscular activation and our motor unit recruitment. We've talked about that before in the previous workshop, in that our nervous system fires up a lot better and our nervous system becomes more adapted to the exercise. We start to move a little bit better. And then the last one is we might get some short-term muscle soreness. We've all felt that before, that 1 to 2 days of delayed onset muscle soreness. We call it DOMS. Why that's great is that we know that we've been breaking and tearing down those muscle fibers, so they're going to grow back bigger and stronger. Let's now look at some of the long-term adaptations to resistance training. So we might have been following a strength training program now for 6 to 8, 10, 12 weeks, and we're starting to see some long-term progress. So some of these is we're going to improve the protein synthesis or the uptake by muscle. So now we're getting more protein and amino acids into our muscles. Our muscles are growing in response. They're getting bigger, faster, and stronger. We're getting increases in the size of our muscles. That's what we call muscle hypertrophy. Really important term to understand. Hypertrophy means an increase in muscle size. The next one is we're getting an increase in the force of muscular contractions. That's strength. Okay, our muscles are now contracting with a lot more force. We're recruiting more motor units. We're getting stronger. The last one is the increase in rate of muscular contractions. So we're looking at power now. So now not only are we contracting our muscles more forcefully, we're contracting our muscles quicker. Increased time to muscular exhaustion, so we're improving our endurance. Now we can do more and more. The body can handle more volume, more sets, more reps, less rest. We're getting endurance, and we're getting the improved ability to get rid of lactic acid, and that's a waste product that builds up during strength training, so we can train harder and longer. So again, you can see long-term consistent training in the gym with strength training and lifting weights, doing resistance, has a number of really important long-term adaptations to the body. Some really good tips for athletes for resistance training. First of all is finding a program that's suited to you and your level of capability where you're at now. You might be coming back from an injury, you might be coming back into lifting weights after a long time off, or you might be at a high level and might be really pushing hard. It's important to have that individualized program. The second thing is don't be afraid of strength training. Too many athletes spend way too long training in high repetitions, 10, 12, 15, 20 reps of a set. It's important that you get heavy, okay? Training 3, 4, 5, 6 rep sets over and over again, focusing on some of the basics. Squats, deadlifts, presses, rows, pull-ups, dips, all those sorts of things. If you get stronger on those key foundational movements, then everything else becomes easier within the body. The next one we're looking at is flexibility training. So this could be static stretches after a workout. It could be structured stretching like a yoga class, and there's some great responses to this. Some of the short-term responses of flexibility training is increases in your muscles and your joints range of motion, ROM, okay? Very important for people that are tight in certain areas, have pain, postural problems. We need to increase the range of motion. Not only are we increasing range of motion, we're increasing blood flow and oxygen delivery to those muscles. So it's great for recovery, which is why we use stretching a lot as a recovery method. And then the last one is, it's really interesting with the nervous system, is it helps with what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. So it calms the body down. Remember that exercise is a stressor. So we're getting the fight or flight system activated. But stretching actually activates the opposite nervous system, that rest and digest system. So it's a really important one to bring the heart rate down, relaxation, and also for recovery. Some of the long-term adaptations of flexibility training are we're going to get permanent changes now. So our muscles are permanently going to be longer. This is great if you've got tight hips and tight hamstrings and tight trap muscles and neck muscles. We want them permanently elongated. That's great. That improves posture, which is an important concept. We decrease muscular pain because there's less stress placed on our joints, and that helps to reduce the overall risk of injury. So my tips for athletes and for people interested in sport is don't neglect flexibility training. It's really important. It should be part of an everyday routine for you. You should understand the areas in which you're specifically a lot tighter than others and focus on those more than others, and then always including some amount of flexibility training in your warm-ups or in your cool-downs. A lot of athletes will really benefit from using a variety of tools and aids in helping with flexibility training. We can use things like foam rollers, which are great to help release some of the trigger point pressure on muscles. I really like to use structured stretching sessions like different forms of yoga. One of my favorite forms of yoga is a vinyasa yoga, which is a flow type of yoga where we're moving and breathing with every stretch and movement. I think that's fantastic. And I think some of the best things that we can do with flexibility is just to really be consistent. Be consistent, find a routine that works for you. Don't be afraid to use things like resistance bands, using partners to get deeper into stretches, foam rollers, and structured sessions like yoga is really important too. Stretching can definitely be shown and proven to help reduce injury risk. Not specifically doing long static stretches where you just hold positions before workouts, but by generally being more flexible and stretching a lot more is going to reduce the injury risk. If we think about it from an anatomical view, is there's just less stress placed on joints. Okay, if you've got tight muscles, then the joints are going to be taking a lot of the load. So that's why it's really important to stretch and stay loose and supple right throughout. It's going to help reduce your injury risk and help to improve your performance as well. Stretching is also really important for recovery. As we looked at some of those short-term adaptations of flexibility training to exercise, we're getting an increased blood flow and oxygen delivery into those muscles. So what that is also doing, it's clearing some of the waste product out of our muscles, so it's helping us to recover. So using stretching and not neglecting it, not walking away from an exercise session and not stretching, is going to essentially allow you to train again at a shorter period. It's going to improve your recovery. You're going to be able to train harder for longer with a decreased injury risk. So don't neglect stretching, everyone. It's really, really important that you use it wisely and make sure it's part of your everyday life. Some of my recommendations are, as a part of your warm-up, is to definitely go through a range of dynamic stretches. So things like leg swings and arm circles, squats and lunges, and the various movement patterns that you're going to be doing in the gym. That's really important, okay? You've got to get the body loose. You've got to get the joints working through a range of motion before you start using any load or adding any volume or intensity to your workouts. At the end of the session, when the muscles are warm and they've been activated, that's a great time to do some static stretching. So that's where you can kind of slow things down, hold the stretches for a little bit longer, really get into some of the tight areas, especially the muscle groups that you've just trained. So if you've done a lot of squats or deadlifts, you might really want to focus on glutes, lower back, quads and hamstrings. If you've done an upper body session, you might really want to focus on stretching like your biceps and your lats and your neck muscles and things like that. The last thing is doing stretching at home. I don't mind if you're cool or warm or whatever, just as long as you're doing it. But stretching at home is what I would do, is I would focus on 2 or 3 stretches that you know that you're really tight in, and just focus on hitting those and hanging out in those stretches for longer periods of time. You're not going to be going straight into exercise, so it's actually okay to be doing some long static stretches. So for example, myself, I'm really tight in my lower back and my hamstrings. So what I'll do is every day I'll spend 5 minutes laying on the floor with my legs up the wall. And the reason why I do that is to release my hamstrings and lower back. I'll sit there for 5 minutes without moving. I'll do that every single day. And that's part of my sort of flexibility and mobility sequence. And that's really important to help me reduce my lower back pain.